Come, let us explore the complete contrast between Dhyana and Samantha. This morning's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. Oopsie, actually this one was found on YouTube. The mistake is on me. Samantha is different from Dhyana? How? I thought Dhyana is a generic term for meditation. So, the price of intellectual integrity is flexibility. Life is very, very complicated. And if you crack a good dictionary, you'll find that for virtually every word, there are multiple definitions. Drag a translator into a bar. Give them a couple beers and they'll admit that translation is less of a science and more of an art. Language is complicated. Humans are complicated. Everything is complicated. Ask a physicist, ask a biologist. They'll be happy to cite numerous and sundry examples. If every time a preconception is shattered, we feel defensive and angered, that's going to be exhausting. Everything is changing all the time. The older you get, the more you'll see the fluidity of language, and kind and considerate terminology of the 70s is now the spiteful and hate language of the 2020s. Life is always changing. Like those movies from the 40s or the 30s where loggers had to balance precariously upon semi-submerged trees in the river on the way to the mill. They call that log rolling. Literally, language is always changing. Now we can be self-centered and say, oh, woe is me, I have to change. Or we can be loving and say, cool, I get to find better and better ways of making people feel respected and safe and loved, which is cool. So same thing with Buddhism. You'd say, there's so many versions of so many definitions of so many terminologies. Yes, and that we can learn so many spiritual lessons from that. And I'd like to do that with you right now. If you've come to my previous live streams, you've found that one of my favorite introductory quotes is Sturgeon's Law, wherein he reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. And we can look at this dichotomy of humanity through the lens of yin and yang, through the lens of patriarchy or matriarchy, or historically through the lens of Devadatta or Gautama the Buddha. You see, Devadatta was considered, real or imagined, was considered the Buddha's foolish cousin. And where the Buddha lauded being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, Devadatta was the opposite. He was enthusiastic to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. So this is not unique to Buddhism. This is not unique to the spiritual or the quasi-spiritual world. Wherever there are humans, you're going to find a lot of them who think it's wonderful to be this way, and a little bit who are this way. We even found this in academia. So many post-doctrinal physicists express the same disappointment that as children, when learning about logical fallacy and cognitive bias. They thought that once they entered formal academia, having defended their thesis, they would be around people who would be put in the pursuit of the truth and the welfare of the species above personal pride and convenience, and they were mistaken. Even lettered people who should know better still fall prey to logical fallacy and cognitive bias. And so often, the new generation of physicists has to wait for the older generation to either surgically remove their head from their warm, dark place they keep it, or die. Similarly, those who embrace this worldview are drawn to positions of power and prestige and authority the way that ants are drawn to a dropped popsicle on a summer sidewalk. They can't help themselves. It's not malicious. It's seldom deliberate. They're just following their fundamental wiring. So these people, like the real or mythical Devadatta, are drawn to positions of power, prestige, and authority without striving to be worthy of it, without striving to intellectually and emotionally and yogically master the teachings. They just want to know the teachings well enough to be able to be a poser, to be able to have the power and the prestige and the authority. And so what happens is you have people like this who, once again, ascend to positions of authority and then change things arbitrarily. Usually, they will create dichotomies, distinctions, and then they will oppress those who teach or practice in a way that is different from the way they do. Not because they have any real conviction other than a lust for power and prestige. It's tragic, but it's universal. Excuse me. Shakespeare wrote of pretenders to the throne, people who are more worthy to getting power than knowing what to do with it when they had it. We see that in Disney's The Lion King. We saw that in a wonderful episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And that is what's going on in an overarching sort of a way. How does that relate to samatha and vipassana? Let's explore specifically through the lens of neuroscience. Those who are rigid and fearful and controlling and elitist and cryptic and competitive and cruel and superstitious will implore their students to practice active concentration and active analysis. They might describe these using the Pali terms samatha and vipassana. They might describe these using the Sanskrit terms, which is shamatha and vipassana, which is tough. It feels like I'm going to injure my jaw when I say that. That's a lot of lateral jaw play. But here's the thing. The only way to practice either of those two things or both of those things is to rely on discrete neurological mechanisms such as those found in the medial prefrontal cortex or the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. No, don't get me wrong. This prefrontal cortex is astonishing, and it's ideal if you want to compare, contrast, sort, edit, calculate. It's great. Reason, perfect. But like a Stradivarius violin, it's high strung. And when it is overworked, and it doesn't take much to overwork it, it stimulates the amygdala. This lumpy thing right here that kind of looks like a large P. This thing is the seat of our aggression and anxiety. And so here's the weird thing. The more we practice active concentration, the more we're going to become anxious, aggressive, rigid, controlling, fearful, superstitious, and the like. So there is a physiological basis to these psychological behaviors, these psychological symptoms. This infers a question. Is there organelles within our central nervous system that are better suited for mindfulness and meditation? Yes, there are. Every time we inhale, oh, good morning. Oh, good morning, you. So it depends. So here's the funny thing. A good question was asked, the samatha, calm abiding, and vipassana insight. It can be, those are translations, and they're rather poetic translations. Calm abiding sounds very peaceful. Samatha is very violent. It's a form of concentration. What's concentration? Concentration says, this piece of plastic right here, this is all I'm going to focus on. Everything else can fuck off. I'm just focusing on this plastic, or this breath, or this visualization, or this sound. But what it is, it's an active concentration. And it's inherently violent. And as a fringe benefit, it really makes us cranky and superstitious. I have the good fortune to be neurodivergent. I'm having both ADHD and autism. And these are gifts. These are really inconvenient gifts, but they're gifts. There's nothing as the easiest way to have a ridiculous degree of sensory acuity is to be autistic. We can hear electricity in the wires and the walls. It's insane. And so for someone who is autistic, when I had the privilege of practicing with each sect of Buddhism, I was able to notice how applying the instructions affected my body and brain, and how it affected the behaviors of others, as well as their reported experiences. And I found consistently over multiple decades that all who practice concentration excite their amygdala. So even though calm abiding is a gentle poetic term, it's a gentle term slapped on a violent process. If you in high school read George Orwell's 1984, you were familiar with the concept that the Ministry of Love was about waging warfare, the Ministry of Truth was about lying to the public, and so forth and so on. So that is nothing new. We call them euphemisms. The person wrote, I have been searching, trying to understand the meaning of the terms have changed over time. Well said. They have. But that's universal. That's universal. There are horrible racial slurs in this century that 4 centuries ago were not considered racial terms. Doesn't mean they weren't. It just means that everything is changing all the time. And like loggers navigating tree trunks in a river, we have to be nimble. Instead of nimble on our feet, we have to be nimble-minded. So now that we've explored that shamatha and vipassana, or samatha and vipassana, are chores of the prefrontal cortex, let's talk about which organelles of the central nervous system are ideal for mindfulness meditation. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we are wired by evolution to access effortlessly and automatically our sympathetic nervous system, which is found in the middle third, approximately, of our spinal cord. This sympathetic nervous system has evolved to help us perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. But perceive what? What is the object of our perception? Glad you asked. To help us perceive sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, including emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We have evolved to perceive entire spectra of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the painful to the pleasurable, from the boring to the interesting, from the grotesque to the glorious, and all points in between. And yes, that can feel overwhelming. Fortunately, evolution has given us a bit of a safety valve. Every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we're wired to automatically access our parasympathetic nervous system, ensconced within both the lower third as well as the upper third of that same spinal cord, depending upon how you like to organize the organelles of the central nervous system. You put two academics together, you're going to get three opinions. People just disagree. That's fine. That's just the wonder of being a human. This parasympathetic nervous system has evolved to support both physical relaxation as well as mental release. Now, you could rightfully ask, and hopefully you are clever enough to ask this question. Kind of cross your arms and lift your chin and look down your nose and say, "Hey, Lama Jigme, you oddly dressed fellow. Tell me this." And by the way, the 70s called, they want their hair back. But if I have these two facets of my autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, why aren't I already peaceful? Why do I need to meditate? In a word, the answer is simple. The answer is Urkel. Urkel, according to the TV show from the late 80s, was a good-hearted kid. Brilliant, but klutzy, super klutzy. Urkel was an archetype of autism. I'm still not sure how I feel about that. But Urkel, in his klutziness, would create chaos and then be astonished at the chaos and ask pathetically, "Did I do that?" And that's kind of how our brain is. Due to a quirk of evolution, our cerebral cortex is so jam-packed with organelles, it's as cluttered as the storage space of a hoarder. However, we can cut through that confusion like a Gordian knot. How do we do that? Simple. When we silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun "this" during our inhalation, our cerebral cortex cannot help but cooperate with our sympathetic nervous system. Similarly, when we silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb "ease" during our exhalation, this exact same cerebral cortex can't help but cooperate with our parasympathetic nervous system. So this is kind of like updating your drivers on your computer or updating the apps on your smartphone. A smartphone without apps is an expensive paperweight. An insanely expensive phone. With up-to-date apps, it's a computer stronger than the computer used in Apollo 13. Amazing, is it not? So what has this to do with the dichotomy of Dhyana and Shamatha? Well, contrary to the ravings of the rigid, and by the way, these minions of patriarchy have found their way into every sect, every subsect of every spiritual system, and every secular system, and every vocational system, and every recreational system. People who can't wait to take umbrage and pick fights. They're trolls. These are people standing knee-deep in pig poop, and they are offended that you won't wade into the pig poop and wrestle with them. So, I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. So, even in the Mahamudra circles, even in the Dzogchen circles, you're going to find people who insist that shamatha and vipassana are prerequisites to the lofty practice of Sutra Mahamudra, or Treksho, or Ati Yoga, or Mahasanti. However, neither Bodhidharma nor the author of the Song of Enlightenment, Yongjia Xuanjue, nor Prahe Vajra, renowned as the first human teacher of Dzogchen, taught that. They just taught immediately start practicing mindfulness and meditation, vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. That's why they insisted that enlightenment could be accomplished quickly. That's why the Buddha insisted that enlightenment need not take aeons. It could be mastered in less than 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. That promise is found in the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta. The people who, like Devadatta, are rigid and fearful and controlling, find their techniques don't work. Lacking the flexibility to question their assumptions, they just blame the populace. Well, you folks are unworthy of these teachings. This is the dark age. It's going to take you an insanely long period of time. But the Buddha never taught that. I can't tell you how many Dzogchen teachers say, well, you will understand this perfectly if you're smart enough, and if you're spiritual enough, and if your karma is pure enough. But if you can't understand the words coming out of my pie hole, it's your fault. Gee, thanks for the humility, Chief. Guys, if you don't understand your teacher, it's your teacher's fault. If you don't understand me, it's my fault. Now, you can help me out by asking really, really precise questions, and hopefully I have the heart and the mind to answer them well. But if you don't understand, it's on me, not you. So, now let's get technical. A subset or cult that developed within the shamatha community was the jhana cult, the cult of trance experience, the cult of getting stoned off our own neurotransmitters and thinking it très spiritual. In time, jhana became pronounced as dhyana. And in time, those who practiced sati passaddhi borrowed that term dhyana. And if you find that confusing, that's understandable. But language is confusing, and humans are confusing, and they keep switching out what words mean. When I was in high school, I thought I knew everything. Now that I'm 59, standing on the precipice of my 60th decade on the planet, I have been disabused of that illusion. I live a few blocks from the local high school and several blocks from the nearest elementary school. And on my walk, I hear people talking. Tweens and teens, and you know what? Language keeps shifting. If you don't believe me, jump on TikTok and listen to people talking. it keeps shifting. What's funny is that people who were smarmy in high school with their superior slang, once they graduate college and they see that slang has changed again, they too feel befuddled and left in the dust, like the coyote on a Roadrunner cartoon. So, words have come to mean different things over vast oceans of time. Especially, you'll notice that slang is not transmitted in a written way, but in an oral way. So the more we write things down, the slower they change. The more we rely on whispered lineage, mouth to ear. That sounds a little too salacious, but mouth to ear, the more rapidly things change. And that's okay as long as the communicators are wise and kind. When the communicators are dull and cruel, nightmares, tragedies ensue. For instance, when Bodhidharma came to China, he did not teach abusing students. He did not teach speaking cryptically or in riddles. Yet that became the practice over X number of centuries. But even in the lengthy and most famous discourse of Zen Master Dogen, he explores how this cryptic style of communication caused numerous monks to lose decades of their training because of misunderstanding. Speaking in riddles was never taught by the Buddha. It was never taught by Bodhidharma. It is a corruption. In Tibet, there's a lot of elitism. But as the Buddha lay dying, as recorded in the Nirvana Sutra, he explained, I have taught with an outstretched arm and an open hand, keeping no secrets. Elitism is not of Gautama. It is of Devadatta. Elitism is not of spiritual matriarchy. It is of pseudo-spiritual patriarchy. It is not of yin. It is of yang. There is nothing that should be a secret teaching. The late head of the Nyingma Order shared all the teachings publicly in books that were open books. This has been confirmed and even approved of by the 14th Dalai Lama, who, although isn't as generous with the so-called sacred teachings as his teacher Dilgo Khyentse was, signed off on it in his foreword to the Heart Treasure of the Enlightened Ones, which is a wonderful book that changed my life. So I'm going to answer some questions now. Hopefully the person who asked the question is still there and is patient with my silliness. I think the button I want to click is 8. Okay. So I'm going to play catch up on what's going on here, what this person wrote. I've been searching, trying to understand the meaning of the term that have changed. Let's see. Over time. Well done, you. That's good. Oh, yes, by the way, this scenario forces good-hearted students to be more like Indiana Jones than we'd really rather be. Oh, that's swinging from a whip. That's hard on the shoulders, isn't it, kids? The mindfulness method you're describing, it sounds a lot like the Kriya method yoga that Forrest Knudsen discusses in his YouTube channel. He talks about heart rate variability and activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So I am sure this person means well. I haven't read I haven't listened to his discourses, but I would just say this. It's simple. Every time we breathe in, we are wired to access our sympathetic nervous system. We can either fight it or cooperate with it. And we can cooperate with it by playing with the word this. Every time we exhale, we are wired to access our parasympathetic nervous system. We can either fight that or acquiesce with it. We acquiesce with it by silently and mentally playing with the verb ease during our exhalation. That's the easiest way. Remember, the Buddha taught it's possible to master his path in a week. The more complex the system is, the longer it takes to master. So, in general, the awareness is passive. So, that's a good question. It is every time we relax into every time we inhale, we are wired to notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. The question is not whether we're wired to notice passively. The question is whether or not we are cooperating with it or opposing it. And there you go. The Genghis Mahamudra Pith instructions sound similar to what you're screaming. Well, that's delicious. That's delicious. I love that. Fabulous. If you know of a good translation of the Mahamudra Pith instructions, please send me a YouTube link. I would love to give it a look. And I think I'm all caught up, so I'm going to return now to the lesson. I think that concludes the lesson. I think all that's left now is for us, and this is optional. Whoopsie, wrong button. I think that's all that's left is for us to exercise the option of chanting and meditating together as a team. We could do this after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. I sound like different people at different times. Sometimes I sound like, who's that actor who played the Emperor in Dune? I think a couple seconds ago I sounded like Tucker Carlson. Not intentional. Anywho, let's get on with the show. Oopsie, wrong button. Here we go. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy. Oh, Christopher Walken. That's what I was thinking of. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each school of meditation so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. And now, I think it could be great fun if together as a team we play with the latest iteration of all goods, iconography, and meditation. Ooh, this is an editing opportunity. Here we go. All right, cowabunga. So, I'm fond of the Sanskrit. It's less spooky. The contemporary practice of Dzogchen is divided into 3 sections: Maha Yoga, Anu Yoga, and Ati Yoga. And so I'm going to use these terms repeatedly throughout the morning's practice to demystify the practice. Right now, let's open this practice by chanting Maha Yoga's love and release wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. I think it would make a little more sense if I did that. Let's continue. Together we chant. May all, so by the way, what follows are not prayers to real or imagined entities. We're simply using words to guide our intention, to guide our mind, to guide our energy, to guide our circumstance. May all lots of all beings appearing in void no be as safely fortunate as a pure land of Lord depicted in Buddhist paintings. May all minds of all beings lucid yet void now be as peacefully enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a one-syllable vision. May all speech of all beings resounding yet void no be as joyfully loving as a Buddha's speech symbolized by a mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void no be as beautifully healthy as a yada marked type depicted in Buddhist statuary. I spy with my little eye a comment. So you are utterly welcome for these explanations. I am ever available to answer your questions. My only request is that when you ask those questions, you be as precise as possible to help me to help you. Forgive the quote to Jerry Maguire, of Jerry Maguire. So we're going to switch from Mahi Yoga's Love and Release to Mahi Yoga's iconography. Why? Why have iconography? Simple. Complex animal life forms on this planet evolved to think symbolically. Way back in the primordial sea, our distant ancestors first perceived, and over time they began recollecting past perceptions and anticipating future perceptions. And thus was born the armature that would give rise to the big old brain of Homo sapien sapien. Let's chant. The nudity of the all good ones remind us that with inhalations this we are wired to mindfully notice vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. Ooh, look at this. This is what we call an editing opportunity. Let's make sure everything is pleasing to the eyeball. Now return to Anu Yoga's Bliss and Release. Ratna Sambhava Karma Mundaras Earth Elemented Oneva Wildram is accessed by resting the great knuckle at the base of our right ring finger gently upon the tip of our left. And then resting our hands in our lap. So so let's practice right now. And in a fun, so this is and what can be fun is this. What I love doing is this. One of the hacks I found to help me to meditate despite having ADHD is to perform what I like to describe as Bengali crease counting. And so we use the fingers and thumbs to count 12 sets of 12 repetitions so that we collect approximately 144 rounds of breath, which is one inhalation and one exhalation during each practice. So I'm going to lift my hand, and as you silently and mentally recite this, if you want, you can advance your right thumb as I do mine. I'm starting with the little finger. So we know how to count repetitions now. How are we going to keep track of sets on our left hand? Only instead of starting with our little finger, we're going to start with our index finger and work our way over. So now we're going to start here for our first set. of 12 reps. But once again, hands in the lap in the manner previously described. Let's practice. By the way, in some circles of Tantra, it is taught that beginning with our navel wheel is Mother Tantra. Oops, I gotta adjust my legs here. Oh my goodness. L'chaim. Let me see if I can squeeze that in here. That's what he said. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's move forward. The translucence of the all good ones reminds us that as we meditatively ease into our exhalation. Ooh, look at this. My goodness. That is really, really tight. Although we noticed during our previous inhalation could feel less solid, less permanent, and less defining. So before we worked with Mother Tantra, now we're going to work with calling the teacher as from afar, known in Tibet as Lama Kyano. Varajana Karma Mundra Space Element at our crown wheel seat on. Is accessed by resting the great knuckle at the base of our right index finger gently upon the tip of our left. We come to our third Mahayoga iconography. Please chant with me. The beauty of the All Good Ones reminds us of the highest love, which is the spontaneous, uncontrived, and effortless product of training in mindfulness and meditation. Akshobhya Karma, moon that is water element at our heart whale seed, whom is accessed by resting the great knuckle and the base of our right middle finger gently upon the tip of our left. We now prepare for this morning's, the final meditation for this early morning's live stream. Let's begin with Mahayoga's iconography. The stability with which he sits and the abandon with which she sports reminds us of the effortless effort of love-centered spontaneity, the product of training in mindfulness and meditation. We come now to Ana Yoga's bliss and release. Amoga City Karma Mundaras Wind Element at our secret wheel Sina is accessed by resting the great knuckle at the base of our right little finger gently upon the tip of our left. Let's seal this practice by chanting Mahayoga's love and release wishes. For universal enlightenment and well-being. May all lots of all beings appearing yet void no be as safely fortunate as a pure land of law depicted in Buddhist paintings. May all minds of all beings lucid yet void no be as peacefully enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a one-syllable bija. May all speech of all beings resounding yet void no be as joyfully loving as a Buddha speech symbolized by a mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void no be as beautifully healthy as a yadam archetype depicted in Buddha statuary. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 9.25 hours, I would very much like to return to lead today's evening meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Force be with you always.